The clock inside the Memorial Library ticked past midnight, and the fluorescent lights hummed softly over rows of empty tables. Rachel Miles stretched her arms, closing her psychology notebook with a sigh. The last line she'd written read, "Fear alters perception." She smiled faintly at the irony. She'd been feeling uneasy all week, though she couldn't say why. Outside, the October air in Madison carried a sharp chill, the kind that hinted winter was coming. Rachel zipped her faded green jacket, slipped her phone into her pocket, and waved goodbye to the night clerk, who barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. Her sneakers echoed softly down the steps as she crossed the quiet campus, streetlights glowing like lonely halos in the mist. Her dorm was only 10 minutes away near Lake Mendota. Most nights she walked that route without a second thought, but tonight felt different. The pathways were nearly deserted, and the wind coming off the lake whistled through the trees like distant whispers. Somewhere behind her a door slammed and she flinched. Rachel turned slightly, scanning the path. Nothing. Just the shadows of old oaks and the dim orange blur of the campus lights. She shook it off and kept walking, pulling her scarf tighter. She thought of Megan, her roommate, probably asleep by now, and Kyle, who had texted earlier. "Study late again? You're gonna burn out, Rach." She hadn't replied. Lately, things between them had been tense, arguments sparked by things that didn't even matter. Halfway across the bridge near Memorial Union, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single text appeared. "You shouldn't be alone right now." Her pulse quickened. She stopped walking, staring at the message as the screen's glow lit her face. "Who is this?" she typed back, her fingers trembling slightly. No reply. Just the sound of water slapping against the rocks below. She started walking faster. The path curved toward the lake, where a lamp post flickered weakly. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine started, then cut off. Rachel's breath formed small white clouds in front of her. She thought she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. But when she turned again, the path was empty. Reaching into her pocket, she realized her phone was gone. Panic shot through her chest. She retraced her steps, searching the path, but it was nowhere. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice catching in the cold air. No answer. The next morning, a jogger found that same phone lying face up near the lakeshore, screen cracked, the text still visible. Rachel Miles had vanished. And before we uncover the chilling truth behind what happened that night, the twists, the deception, and the betrayal buried beneath Madison's quiet streets, make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next will redefine everything you thought you knew about justice. In the weeks to come, the disappearance of a 20-year-old college sophomore would grip an entire town, spark a decade-long mystery, and reveal that even in a peaceful place like Wisconsin, darkness can hide in plain sight. In the days following her disappearance, Rachel Miles became more than just a missing person. She became a face taped to every lamppost in Madison, the girl with the bright smile and green eyes that seemed to belong to everyone's memory. Friends described her as steady, almost predictable, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and brought coffee for others before exams. Rachel wasn't the type to just disappear, her roommate Megan said through tears. She planned everything, even what socks to wear. Rachel grew up in Milwaukee, the middle child of a high school teacher and a nurse. Her parents, Michael and Teresa Miles, told reporters she'd always been the responsible one. Her older brother Mark had joined the Navy, her younger sister was still in high school, but Rachel had been their constant, the one who called home every Sunday without fail. That call never came on October 15th. On campus, she was a sophomore majoring in psychology, fascinated by human behavior and the way fear shaped decision-making. Her professors knew her as precise and curious, sometimes too serious for her age. One of them, Professor Danvers, once said during class, "Rachel asks the kind of questions that keep me awake at night." It was meant as praise. Megan, her roommate in the Lakeshore dorms, told police they'd spent the afternoon before Rachel vanished together. They'd eaten pizza, joked about exams, and planned to watch a movie later. She said she wanted to stop by the library for just an hour, Megan recalled. Then she'd be back, but she never was. Rachel's boyfriend, Kyle Preston, a junior studying engineering, was one of the first to be questioned. He and Rachel had dated for over a year, and their relationship had been steady, until lately. Megan admitted they'd argued more often, usually about Rachel spending too much time studying or tutoring other students. "Kyle could be protective," she said carefully, "but I don't think he'd ever hurt her." Yet when detectives asked about Rachel's state of mind that week, Megan hesitated. She'd been anxious, she said finally. She thought someone was following her, but she laughed it off, said it was just stress. Her friends remembered the same unease. A classmate said Rachel had been checking over her shoulder while walking to class. Another mentioned she'd started leaving the library before closing time. Still, to everyone who knew her, Rachel was the embodiment of stability, the girl who kept other people grounded, which made her sudden disappearance all the more terrifying. As the days turned into weeks, the portrait of Rachel that filled news segments and flyers became both familiar and haunting. Smiling, confident, alive. The kind of face that made strangers stop and stare, wondering how someone like her could vanish without a trace in a town that prided itself on safety. In Madison's quiet rhythm, Rachel's absence created an echo that no one could ignore. And as whispers began to spread about who might have wanted her gone, one question grew louder than all the rest. How well did anyone really know Rachel Miles? The first sunlight over Madison was pale and cold, reflecting off the still surface of Lake Mendota. Students drifted across campus half awake, coffee cups in hand, unaware that one of their own was already missing. In room 214 of Lakeshore Hall, Megan sat on the edge of her bed staring at her phone. Rachel's side of the room was untouched, her laptop closed, her textbooks stacked neatly, her bed still made. The silence felt wrong. By noon, Rachel had missed 2 classes. Megan tried to convince herself that maybe Rachel had gone home for the weekend, though her suitcase was still under the bed. When she finally called Kyle, his voice was rough with sleep. "She's probably studying somewhere," he said. "You know how she gets." But Megan could hear the unease beneath his words. At 4 p.m., the campus police were notified. 2 officers arrived, polite but dismissive, jotting notes as if reading from a script. "College students go off the grid all the time," one said. "Maybe she just needed space," Megan bristled. "Rachel doesn't just disappear. She's not like that." That night, Megan and a few friends walked Rachel's usual route from the library to their dorm, flashlights in hand. The October wind bit at their faces as they traced the narrow path along the lake. A few joggers passed by, giving them strange looks. Near the curve by the Memorial Union, something glimmered in the dirt. Rachel's hair tie, a small blue one she wore almost every day. Megan's hand shook as she picked it up. "She was here," she whispered. The next morning, Rachel's parents arrived from Milwaukee, exhaustion and panic etched across their faces. Teresa clutched her daughter's favorite sweatshirt, while Michael tried to remain calm. "She calls us every Sunday," he told the officer. "She wouldn't stop without a reason." Still, the police insisted there was no sign of foul play. It wasn't until Megan remembered Rachel's diary that things took a darker turn. It sat on her desk, hidden beneath a stack of psychology notes. When she opened it, the last entry was dated 2 nights before Rachel vanished. "Someone's been watching me. I keep seeing the same guy outside the library. Maybe it's nothing, but I can't shake it." Megan's stomach tightened. She showed the diary to Detective Harris, who frowned but said little. "We'll look into it," he promised, but his tone lacked conviction. As the day ended, flyers with Rachel's photo began appearing across campus, her smiling face beneath the word "missing" in bold letters. Students whispered in dining halls, professors paused lectures, and the once comfortable campus air turned heavy with unease. For Megan, sleep became impossible. Every creak in the hallway made her heart jump. She started leaving her light on through the night. "Where are you, Rach?" she whispered into the dark, voice trembling. Somewhere deep down, she already knew this wasn't just a case of a girl taking time off. Something terrible had happened, and Madison was only beginning to realize it. By the end of that first week, Madison no longer felt like a college town. It felt like a search zone. Flyers with Rachel's photo covered every bulletin board, coffee shop window and telephone pole from State Street to the edge of Lake Mendota. Students who had never met her now used her first name like they'd known her all their lives. Did they find Rachel yet? Became the question whispered in every hallway. Local news stations aired grainy footage of her leaving the library. Reporters stood outside the campus gates, microphones in hand, voices tight with urgency. A University of Wisconsin sophomore has vanished without a trace. The story spread fast. Small-town safety shattered overnight. Parents called their kids hourly. The city's calm rhythm turned jittery, uncertain. The police, overwhelmed by attention, held a press conference in front of City Hall. Detective Harris stood stiff behind the podium. "We are exploring all possible leads," he said, his tone rehearsed. "At this time there is no evidence of foul play." A reporter shot back, "Then where is she?" Harris didn't answer. Behind the cameras, Rachel's parents stood together, holding hands. Teresa's eyes were red, her voice cracking as she spoke. "If anyone knows anything at all, please come forward." Her husband placed a hand on her shoulder, his jaw clenched tight. That night, hundreds gathered on the university's front lawn for a candlelight vigil. The October wind carried the sound of soft prayers and muffled sobs. Megan stood in the crowd, her face lit by the flickering flame. She held Rachel's favorite blue hair tie in her pocket like a relic. "She's out there," she whispered to Kyle, who stood beside her in silence. "I can feel it." Kyle didn't respond. He looked thinner, hollow-eyed, the weight of suspicion already pressing on him. "I keep thinking I'll see her walking across the quad," he muttered. "Like this is some mistake." Megan glanced at him, searching his face. "You still love her, right?" He met her eyes briefly. "Always." Online forums buzzed with theories. Some said she'd been abducted near the lake. Others claimed she'd run away, citing stress and perfectionism. A few posts went darker, accusing people close to her. Anonymous users picked apart Rachel's life, her grades, her boyfriend, her professors, as if truth could be solved by speculation. Megan tried not to read the comments, but curiosity won. When she saw her own name mentioned, the jealous roommate, she slammed her laptop shut, shaking. Days turned into weeks. The university increased campus patrols, professors cancelled late-night classes, and the once busy library emptied after dark. Madison's air grew heavier, like the whole city was holding its breath. Still, hope lingered, faint but alive. Teresa Miles returned every weekend to organize search groups. Students volunteered, walking the wooded trails and lakeshore paths. "We won't stop until she's home," Teresa said to the local news. But beneath that determination, fear was spreading, a quiet, creeping realization that maybe Rachel wasn't coming back. 2 weeks after Rachel's disappearance, the investigation hit a wall until a janitor from the Memorial Library walked into the police station. His name was Walter Pierce, a quiet man in his late 50s with tired eyes and nicotine-stained fingers. He told Detective Harris he'd seen something the night Rachel vanished. "I was cleaning up around midnight," he said, voice trembling slightly. "There was a girl outside the south entrance, looked like the one on the posters." Harris leaned forward. "Rachel Miles." Walter nodded. "Yeah." "She was arguing with someone, a man, tall, maybe 6 feet. He wore a dark jacket and a cap. I couldn't see his face, but he sounded angry." "Did you hear what they said?" "Not much. Just her voice. She said, 'You're scaring me.' Then she walked off toward the lake." The room went silent. Harris scribbled notes, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you come forward sooner, Mr. Pierce?" Walter hesitated, twisting his cap in his hands. "Didn't think it mattered. Figured the cops already knew." Within hours, the department released a sketch based on Walter's description. The image spread fast, on TV, online, and across every bulletin board in Madison. The man's face was generic, almost familiar, and that made it worse. It could be anyone, people said. Still, rumors ignited. At the coffee shop near campus, whispers filled the air. "They say it looks like her boyfriend," someone muttered. "Kyle, right?" The barista shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time." By nightfall, Reporters surrounded Kyle's apartment. "Did you know the man in the sketch?" one shouted. Kyle pushed past them, face pale and tight. "I didn't hurt her," he said. "I loved her." Megan watched the interview on TV, her stomach churning. The sketch didn't look exactly like Kyle, but something about the jawline, the posture, made her uneasy. When she called him, he didn't answer. The next day, Kyle showed up at her dorm. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice low. "They're turning on me," he said. "Everyone." Megan crossed her arms. "Then tell the truth, Kyle." "Were you with her that night?" He shook his head. "No, I was at my apartment. Ask anyone." But Megan remembered Rachel's diary entry about the man following her, and how she'd mentioned arguing with Kyle days before she disappeared. The pieces didn't fit, but they didn't feel random either. Meanwhile, Detective Harris grew frustrated. The witness's account, though compelling, lacked solid proof. No security footage captured the argument, and no physical evidence linked anyone to the scene. Still, the tension in town was palpable. Students avoided walking alone after dark, and the lake path, once a peaceful escape, became a place people crossed quickly, eyes down. In the midst of growing fear, one truth settled like fog over Madison. Rachel hadn't simply vanished. Someone had been with her that night, and the longer it took to find him, the colder the trail grew. The week after the sketch release, the calm surface of Madison cracked completely. Students whispered in cafeterias, professors paused mid-lecture when Kyle Preston's name came up, and the media's spotlight turned relentless. His face was everywhere, on local news broadcasts, online articles, and even gossip forums. The caption beneath his photo read, "Boyfriend of missing student questioned again." Kyle's apartment became a war zone of flashing cameras and reporters shouting questions he refused to answer. "Did you argue with her that night? Why haven't you taken a lie detector test?" He pushed through them with shaking hands, muttering, "You don't know what you're talking about." Detective Harris brought him in for another round of questioning. The interrogation room was cold, fluorescent, sterile. Harris leaned forward, eyes fixed. "You said you were home the night Rachel disappeared." "Anyone who can confirm that?" Kyle exhaled sharply. "I told you, I was working on a project alone." "That's convenient," Harris said. "Your neighbor says she heard shouting around midnight." Kyle's voice rose. "That wasn't me." He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, Rachel and I fought sometimes, but I'd never hurt her." Harris slid the sketch across the table. "You see the resemblance?" Kyle stared at it. "No, I see a guy in a hat. That's not me." When he left the station, Megan was waiting in the parking lot. "They're destroying you," she said quietly. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. "They've already decided I'm guilty. I can't sleep, can't eat. My mum told me to leave town." "Then why don't you?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because if I do, it'll look worse, and because I didn't do this." For the first time, Megan saw fear in his face. Not anger, not guilt, but raw, consuming fear. She wanted to believe him, but doubt had begun to grow roots inside her. Meanwhile, Detective Harris pulled Rachel's phone records again. One name appeared repeatedly in the week before she vanished: Professor Danvers. Calls, emails, late-night messages. Harris made a note but didn't mention it yet. For now, Kyle was the focus. Online, the story twisted further. Anonymous users leaked photos of Kyle and Rachel arguing at a campus cafe weeks before her disappearance. "He looks furious," someone wrote. "Look at her body language." Every image, every rumor added weight to his presumed guilt. Rachel's parents tried to avoid the coverage, but Teresa couldn't resist watching the evening news. When asked about Kyle, she hesitated. "He loved our daughter," she said softly. "But love can change when fear takes over." The comment played on repeat across networks, each repetition cutting deeper into Kyle's already fragile reputation. By the month's end, the police had nothing concrete, no body, no weapon, no proof, yet everyone in Madison had already chosen sides. To some, Kyle was a grieving boyfriend caught in a nightmare. To others, he was the man who knew exactly what happened to Rachel Miles. Winter crept over Madison like a shroud. The air turned brittle. The lake froze along its edges, and the hope that once filled the community began to fade. The posters of Rachel, once bright and new, now hung tattered and wet from the snow. Her smile, once a symbol of promise, had become an accusation, reminding everyone that she was still gone and no one could explain why. The police continued their searches through the woods near the campus and along the lakeshore. One cold morning, a volunteer found a torn piece of fabric snagged on a branch. It was dark green, the same color as Rachel's jacket. Detective Harris bagged it carefully, his face expressionless, but Megan, watching from behind the yellow tape, felt her stomach twist. "It's hers," she whispered. "I know it." But the discovery didn't lead anywhere. No footprints, no new evidence, just another dead end. The stress of the investigation began to fracture the small circle that had once surrounded Rachel. Megan stopped attending classes. She wandered the campus like a ghost, unable to focus, haunted by memories of late-night study sessions and laughter that now felt impossibly distant. Kyle withdrew completely, refusing interviews and ignoring texts. Rumors swirled that he had dropped out and left town. Rachel's parents stayed in Madison, renting a small apartment near the police station. Every day Teresa called the detectives for updates, her voice cracking a little more each time. "You'll tell me if something changes, right?" she'd ask. "Of course, ma'am," Harris would reply, though he knew there was nothing new to tell. On the 1-month anniversary of her disappearance, students organized another vigil at the lakefront. Candles flickered against the snow, and the faint sound of a guitar filled the cold air. Megan stood beside Teresa, who held a framed photo of her daughter. "She loved this place," Teresa said softly. "She used to say it made her feel free." Her voice broke. "Now it just feels like it's keeping her." The following week, the case officially went cold. The department announced that all active searches were suspended due to lack of evidence. The press conference was brief, clinical, and devastating. That night, Megan sat alone in Rachel's empty room. The bed was still neatly made, just as Rachel had left it. The smell of her lavender shampoo lingered faintly in the air. Megan opened the desk drawer and found one of Rachel's psychology papers, the title underlined, "Fear as a Catalyst for Change." She read the first line aloud through tears. "When fear takes root, it forces transformation, whether we want it or not." Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the campus in white silence. The laughter, the noise, the life, all of it muted. Rachel Miles had become another unsolved mystery, a name whispered by freshmen who hadn't even been there when it happened. But her parents refused to let her memory fade. They founded the Miles Foundation for Missing Students, vowing to help others find what they never could. By 2016, Madison had changed. New buildings, new students, a new generation that barely remembered the name Rachel Miles. For most, her story had faded into the archives of local legend, another cold case collecting dust. But for Detective Laura Jensen, newly transferred to the department, Rachel's file was more than a forgotten mystery. It was an open wound in a city that had never truly healed. Laura found the box labeled Miles Rachel, 2006 in the evidence room, buried beneath years of neglect. Inside were faded photographs, transcripts, and newspaper clippings yellowed at the edges. On top lay Rachel's smiling face, printed on the original missing flyer. Laura traced the edges of the paper with her thumb. "You deserved better," she murmured. She'd been 8 years old when Rachel disappeared. Her family had lived only a few miles from the university. She remembered her mother locking the doors for weeks after the story broke. "That poor girl," her mother had said, shaking her head. "Someone out there knows what happened." Now, standing in the same city, Laura couldn't ignore the case's silence. The more she read, the more questions surfaced. Witness statements were vague, timelines incomplete, and the evidence log showed gaps that made no sense. Lost jacket fragment, chain of custody unclear. Witness follow-up, never conducted. It was sloppy, and she hated sloppy. When she approached her superior, Captain Monroe with the file, his sigh was heavy. "You're digging up ghosts, Jensen. There's no funding for cold cases, and the DA's not interested." "With all due respect, sir," she said, "someone made this girl disappear. We owe her the truth." Monroe gave her a long look before nodding reluctantly. "Fine, but keep it quiet. You find something solid, then we talk." Laura worked nights studying every page, every line. She visited the old paths along Lake Mendota, now lined with new lamps and security cameras that hadn't existed a decade earlier. Students jogged past her, earbuds in, oblivious. The lake was calm, the surface smooth, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling that beneath that silence, the answers still waited. She tracked down Megan, now 30, living in Milwaukee and working as a nurse. When Laura knocked on her door, Megan's face went pale. "After all these years, you still think about her?" "I never stopped," Laura replied. Megan invited her in, the apartment filled with framed photos of her family. "I still dream about her," she confessed. "Sometimes she's walking toward me, smiling like nothing happened. Then I wake up." "Do you think someone from campus was involved?" Laura asked gently. Megan hesitated. "There were things the police never looked into, people they never questioned properly. Rachel trusted someone she shouldn't have." "Who?" Megan looked down. "A professor. But they said he had nothing to do with it." Laura felt her pulse quicken. She didn't know it yet, but those few words had just reopened the door to a truth Madison had buried for 10 long years. Detective Laura Jensen sat in the dim glow of her office, surrounded by stacks of old files and the low hum of the computer. She'd spent weeks combing through the fragments of Rachel's case, piecing together a timeline that had never made sense. Something about the original investigation bothered her. How quickly it had gone cold. How many leads were labeled inconclusive. Tonight she was determined to find what everyone else had missed. She started with the digital evidence, most of which had been copied onto outdated hard drives. It took hours to decrypt them, the hum of the fan filling the silence. Then she found it, a folder marked RM Personal. Inside were dozens of email drafts never sent. The first few were ordinary, reminders about classwork, tutoring schedules, but as she scrolled further, the tone shifted. "I think he's watching me again." Laura frowned, clicking the next file. "He said he wanted to help with my research, but it doesn't feel right anymore. I told Megan I might change advisors." The timestamp, 2 days before Rachel disappeared. Laura's heartbeat quickened. She scanned through the rest, fragments of fear, hesitation, and something else. In one unsent message, Rachel wrote, "If anything happens to me, look at him. No name, no details, just those chilling words." She leaned back, staring at the monitor. "Him," she whispered. Who was she afraid of? The next morning, Laura requested access to the university's archived security footage from 2006. The files were grainy, low resolution, but technology had advanced since then. Using modern software, she enhanced the footage from the night Rachel vanished, the same one that had been reviewed countless times. At first, there was nothing new. Rachel leaving the library, walking toward the path by the lake. Then, just as she passed under a flickering lamppost, a figure appeared several yards behind her. He wasn't wearing a cap, as the witness had described, just a dark coat, collar up, his pace steady. Laura froze the frame, zooming in on the outline of his face. Even distorted, she could make out the features, middle-aged, clean-cut academic. Her stomach dropped. She ran the image through facial recognition, cross-referencing university staff from that year. The system blinked, processed, then displayed a single match. Professor Henry Danvers, Department of Psychology. She sat motionless, the name echoing in her mind. Danvers had been mentioned in the reports, Rachel's mentor, the one who'd spoken kindly of her after she vanished. He'd even helped organize one of the early search efforts. Laura picked up the phone and called Megan. "You said Rachel trusted someone she shouldn't have. Was it Danvers?" The silence on the other end stretched long and heavy before Megan finally whispered, "Yes." "She told me once he crossed a line, but she was scared to tell anyone." Laura stared at the old photo of Rachel on her desk, her smile frozen in time. 10 years of silence had just cracked open. The ghost Rachel left behind was finally starting to speak. Detective Laura Jensen couldn't shake the name from her mind, Professor Henry Danvers. The respected academic who had spoken so tenderly about Rachel in old interviews now loomed over every unanswered question. She spent the next week combing through his records, only to find something odd, a gap in his research publications around the fall of 2006. No explanation, no sabbatical request, just silence. Her next move was clear. She drove to the University of Wisconsin and met with Danvers's former teaching assistant, Ellen Parker, now working in a different department. Ellen looked nervous, twisting a pen between her fingers as Laura spoke. "I just want to understand what was happening back then," Laura said softly. "You worked with him closely, didn't you?" Ellen hesitated. "Yes, but it was a long time ago." "Why bring this up now?" "Because Rachel Miles deserves closure," Laura replied, "and you might hold the key to that." Ellen stared at her hands for a moment, then sighed. "Danvers asked me to hide something," she said finally. "After Rachel went missing, he told me it was just sensitive data from her research. He didn't want it seen." Laura's heart pounded. "Did you keep it?" Ellen nodded slowly. "It's still in my desk. I couldn't throw it away." When she handed over the small dust-covered USB drive, Laura noticed the handwritten label on it, RM. Back at the station, she plugged it into her laptop. The drive contained several folders of psychological notes, data sets, and drafts of Rachel's final research paper. But one document stood out. It was titled Behavioral Boundaries Case Study 7. Inside, Rachel had written detailed observations about her interactions with a faculty mentor, noting how he'd begun crossing professional lines, personal comments, private meetings, uninvited visits to her dorm. "He says he's helping me grow as a researcher," one entry read, "but lately it feels like something else. I don't know how to make him stop." Laura scrolled further and found the final entry, dated the day before Rachel vanished. "He's angry. I told Megan I might report him. I'm scared. If he finds out I've written this, I don't know what he'll do." Laura's chest tightened. She leaned back, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of 10 years of silence pressing against her ribs. She called Captain Munro immediately. "We have a problem," she said. "This isn't a missing persons case anymore. This is cover-up territory." Munro's voice was low. "You're telling me a tenured professor was involved?" "I'm telling you he was the last person to see her alive." That night, Laura sat in her car outside Danvers's house, watching the lights flicker through the window. He was still living near campus, older now, grey-haired, respected, untouchable. Her phone buzzed. A message from Megan. "If you're right about him, be careful. He always knew how to make people disappear." Laura looked up at the dark house and whispered, "Not anymore." Detective Laura Jensen barely slept that week. The discovery of Rachel's research files had shaken her, but she needed proof, something physical that would survive in court. Every night she replayed Rachel's words in her mind. "I don't know what he'll do." The next step was clear. She ordered a new round of forensic testing on the fabric fragment found near Lake Mendota back in 2006, the same one labeled inconclusive. Technology had advanced. DNA methods were sharper now, capable of pulling evidence from the smallest traces. She didn't expect much. But when the lab report arrived, Laura froze mid-breath. The sample had produced a partial match. Not to Kyle Preston, as everyone had long assumed, but to Professor Henry Danvers. Her hands trembled as she read the result again, then again. 10 years of silence cracked open in that single line of text. She went straight to Captain Munro's office. "We have him," she said, placing the report on his desk. He looked skeptical. "You're sure?" "It's a clean match." "There's no question." Munro rubbed his temples. "You're talking about a man the university still celebrates, the kind who sits on scholarship committees and gives guest lectures. If we move on this, it's going to explode." Laura didn't blink. Then let it explode. That afternoon she requested the university's cooperation to re-examine archived faculty records from 2006. Her request was met with immediate resistance. "We can't disclose that information without a court order," the legal department said. "Professor Danvers's reputation must be protected." But Laura was past asking politely. She obtained the warrant within 24 hours. When the documents arrived, they revealed something worse. Internal emails between administrators discussing limiting public speculation regarding Dr. Danvers's relationship with the missing student. Someone had tried to bury it. Laura printed every file and spread them across her desk. The story was becoming painfully clear. Rachel had tried to report her mentor, and instead of protecting her, the institution had protected him. When she called Megan to share the news, there was silence on the line. Finally, Megan whispered, "So it was him, all this time?" "Yes," Laura said quietly. "And we're going to prove it." The next morning, the department's press phones wouldn't stop ringing. Word of the DNA match had leaked. Reporters filled the sidewalk outside police headquarters, shouting questions Laura ignored as she walked inside. By evening, the university released a brief statement acknowledging the renewed investigation and pledging full cooperation. But behind closed doors, panic spread. Donors called, faculty whispered. The perfect image of Madison's beloved professor was starting to crumble. That night, Laura sat in her car, parked by the lake where Rachel had last been seen. The water was still, reflecting the lights of the campus across the shore. She whispered into the dark, "We found you, Rachel. And we're not done yet." The morning of the arrest broke grey and silent over Madison. Detective Laura Jensen stood outside the gates of Professor Henry Danvers's lakeside home, her breath visible in the crisp air. For years, he had lived untouched, lecturing on ethics and human behavior, while the truth about Rachel Miles lay buried beneath 10 years of complacency. Today, that was ending. The knock on his door echoed sharply. When Danvers opened it, he looked older than she remembered from his faculty photo. Silver hair, a calm expression, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. "Detective Jensen," he said, voice even, "I was wondering when you'd come." "You're under arrest for the murder of Rachel Miles," Laura replied, her tone steady. He didn't flinch. "Murder?" "You're mistaken." She read him his rights as uniformed officers stepped forward. Danvers glanced at them, almost amused. "You think you've found something new? I've cooperated with every investigation detective. You're chasing ghosts." Laura's voice cut through him. "Ghosts don't leave DNA, Professor." For the first time, his composure cracked. His jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked away in a small tell, but she saw it. As he was led out in handcuffs, reporters crowded the driveway, cameras flashing like gunfire. "Professor Danvers, did you kill Rachel Miles? Why did you hide evidence?" He said nothing, his silence louder than denial. Back at the station, Laura sat across from him in the interrogation room. The atmosphere was thick with tension. "You mentored Rachel for nearly a year," she began. "You met her privately, off campus. She told friends she was afraid of you." Danvers folded his hands, calm again. "I tried to guide her. She was bright, too bright, but she misunderstood my intentions. She wrote that you were angry the day before she disappeared." He smiled faintly. "Students exaggerate." Laura slid a photograph across the table, the fabric fragment from the lake marked with his DNA. "This was found at the scene. You want to explain that?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, "She came to me that night. She was upset, emotional. I tried to calm her down. She ran off before I could." "Convenient story," Laura said coldly. "Except you didn't report seeing her. You didn't tell anyone. You just went back to work." His voice rose suddenly, breaking the calm facade. "I didn't kill her. She was—" He stopped, breathing hard, eyes darting away. Laura leaned forward. "She was what, Professor?" But he stayed silent. Outside the interview room, Captain Munro watched through the glass. "He's cornered," he said quietly. "You've got him?" Laura nodded. "Not yet, but he's starting to feel the walls close in." That night, the arrest dominated every news outlet. Students gathered at the Lakeshore Memorial, lighting candles again, this time not for hope, but for justice. And though the case was far from over, for the first time in a decade, Madison began to breathe again. The courthouse in Madison overflowed with reporters, students, and residents who had followed the case for years. 10 years of unanswered questions had finally led to this moment, the trial of Professor Henry Danvers. Outside, protesters held signs demanding justice for Rachel Miles. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the murmur of voices silenced only when the bailiff called, "All rise." Detective Laura Jensen sat in the gallery, watching as Danvers was led to the defense table. He looked calm, impeccably dressed, his silver hair perfectly combed. His expression was unreadable, almost smug. Across the aisle, Teresa and Michael Miles sat hand in hand, their faces pale but determined. For them, this was not closure. It was confrontation. The prosecution opened with a simple statement. Rachel Miles trusted her mentor. He used that trust to manipulate her. When she tried to break free, he silenced her. Danvers's defense attorney countered with icy precision. There is no body. No crime scene. No proof that a murder occurred. The prosecution's case relies on theory, not fact. Megan took the stand first. Her voice shook as she recounted the last time she saw Rachel, how she'd mentioned feeling followed, afraid. She told me she thought someone was watching her, Megan said softly. She didn't say who, but I knew. The defense pounced. You knew? Or you assumed? Megan met the lawyer's gaze. I knew the look on her face. She was scared. Kyle testified next, his once youthful energy replaced by exhaustion. He admitted their relationship had been strained, but denied ever hurting her. When the defense hinted that his jealousy made him violent, Kyle clenched his fists. I was angry sometimes, he said, but not enough to kill someone. She wanted out of his control, not mine. Then came the most anticipated testimony, Detective Laura Jensen. The courtroom fell silent as she described the investigation, the recovered DNA, the hidden university emails, and Rachel's final notes. When she mentioned the phrase, "If anything happens to me, look at him," Teresa Miles covered her mouth to stifle a sob. The defense attacked relentlessly. Detective, can you prove beyond doubt that Professor Danvers caused her death? No, Laura admitted. But I can prove he was with her that night, and that he spent 10 years hiding the truth. The final blow came when new forensic analysis revealed trace DNA from Danvers on a bracelet recovered years earlier from the lake's sediment, the same bracelet Rachel's mother had given her before she left for college. The courtroom gasped. When the jury was dismissed for deliberation, hours felt like days. Then finally they returned. The foreman stood, voice trembling slightly. We find the defendant, Henry Danvers, guilty of involuntary manslaughter and obstruction of justice. A collective exhale swept through the room. Teresa wept into her husband's arms. Laura closed her eyes, feeling both relief and sorrow. Danvers didn't look up as the verdict was read. He simply whispered, "You can't prove what you can't find." The verdict echoed through Madison like the toll of a long-awaited bell. After 10 years of whispers and unanswered questions, the name Rachel Miles finally found justice, at least on paper. Outside the courthouse, snow drifted softly across the steps where cameras and reporters gathered, capturing the moment that had become history. Detective Laura Jensen stood near the exit, watching Teresa and Michael Miles embrace. They looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of grief had carved them into something fragile yet unbreakable. Teresa turned to Laura, eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "You gave her back to us," she said quietly. Laura shook her head. "She gave herself back. I just listened to what everyone else ignored." The news spread quickly. Across Wisconsin, Rachel's story reignited old conversations about power, accountability, and the systems that had failed her. The University of Wisconsin released a statement expressing deep regret for past oversights, but for many it was too little, too late. Professor Henry Danvers was sentenced to 20 years in prison, 10 for involuntary manslaughter, 10 for obstruction of justice. When the judge asked if he had any final words, he stood silently, hands clasped. Then, with unsettling calm, he said, "Rachel Miles was brilliant, but brilliance can be dangerous when it shines on the wrong person." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Teresa's face went pale. Laura met Danvers's eyes for a brief, tense moment. There was no remorse there, only defiance. After the trial, Laura walked to the lakeshore where Rachel had last been seen. The water was calm, its surface glazed with thin ice. She stood there for a long time, the sound of the wind carrying fragments of memory. Rachel's laughter, Megan's trembling voice, the echoes of years lost. Megan called later that night. "I saw the news," she said softly. "I thought I'd feel better, but it still hurts." "It will," Laura replied. "Justice doesn't erase pain. It just helps it find a place to rest." Megan exhaled shakily. "Do you think he'll ever tell us what really happened?" Laura stared out the window at the flickering city lights. "No. Some people would rather die with their secrets than face what they've done." A few months later, the Miles family established the Rachel Miles Foundation for Missing Students, dedicated to supporting families whose cases had gone cold. At its opening ceremony, Teresa spoke to a crowd gathered on the university lawn. "Our daughter's story doesn't end with tragedy," she said. "It ends with purpose, with the hope that no one else's child will be forgotten." The crowd applauded softly. Laura watched from the back, her badge heavy in her coat pocket, her heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, she felt that Madison was beginning to heal. Still, as she turned toward the lake, a thought lingered. Justice might have found its name, but truth, the whole truth, still waited somewhere beneath the surface. Spring returned to Madison like a slow breath after years of holding still. The ice on Lake Mendota melted, revealing dark, rippling water beneath a pale blue sky. Students lounged by the shore again, laughing, studying, living, as if time had finally carried the town past its ghosts. But for those who remembered, the lake still whispered Rachel's name. It was early morning when a young student named Olivia Chen took her kayak out onto the lake. The surface was smooth, calm. Halfway across, something glinted beneath the water, a flicker of gold tangled in the reeds. Curious, she reached down and pulled it free. It was a necklace, delicate and rusted, its tiny locket engraved with the letter R. By afternoon, the news spread through campus like wildfire. Police confirmed it matched the one Rachel Miles had been wearing the night she disappeared. The discovery reopened every scar the town thought had healed. Detective Laura Jensen stood by the lake's edge as divers searched the area again, her heart heavy. It had been months since Danvers's conviction, but his words still echoed in her mind. "You can't prove what you can't find." Now the lake itself was answering him. Captain Monroe approached quietly. "You think we'll find her?" Laura's eyes followed the ripples stretching toward the horizon. "I think she's been here all along," she said softly. The divers surfaced hours later with nothing more than fragments of fabric and old debris, but Laura didn't feel disappointment. The necklace was enough, a symbol, a whisper of truth the lake had held onto for a decade. It was Rachel's way of reminding them she hadn't vanished completely. That evening, the Miles family returned to Madison. Teresa held the necklace in her hands, tears slipping down her face. "This was hers," she said. "I gave it to her on her first day of college. She said it made her feel brave." Michael placed an arm around his wife. "Then maybe that's what she's telling us now, to be brave enough to let her rest." Laura felt a lump rise in her throat. "She'd be proud of what you've done," she said. "Because of Rachel, other families won't be forgotten." At sunset, the community gathered at the lakeshore for one final vigil. Candles flickered in the warm evening breeze, reflecting like stars across the water. Teresa stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "Rachel's story began here," she said, "and today we finally let it end." As the candles drifted out over the lake, Laura watched the glow fade into the distance, her thoughts quiet. Justice had been served, but closure, that was something different. Some stories didn't end. They simply changed shape, carried forward by those who refused to forget. She whispered to the wind, "You're free now, Rachel." And for a moment, as the water rippled gently against the shore, it almost felt like the lake was answering her back.